Welcome to this week's edition of World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C., and we've got the continuing collapse of the Obama regime. We're told by Congressman Peter DeFazio, one of the best people in Congress these days, I guess you could say the best of a bad lot. DeFazio says that Obama has been busily working the phones, telling wavering House Democrats and probably some Senate Democrats too, pass the Bush tax cuts for the rich or my presidency will be in ruins. This encapsulates the drama, the pathos of the Obama fakery, which has dominated now for the last 3 years. Brought to you courtesy of those left liberals who are now squealing. They were the shock troops, and he's going to need them again, so let's see how he tries to get them. The Bush tax cuts for the rich, these monuments to failed trickle-down economics, huge tax decreases, tax cuts for the super rich. And because, of course, it is regressive legislation, because what you're left with after you've done these Bush tax cuts or maintained them is the situation where the net impact of taxation on the lower levels of income is qualitatively greater. Remember, the regressive taxation of this type cuts into the necessities of the poor, the working class, and the lower middle class, but it does not touch the luxuries of the super rich, right? The Koch brothers, whatever they may say, are not going to feel the pain, but the people who are getting by on the minimum wage or thereabouts certainly do feel the pain. And we're going to talk later in the broadcast about this notion of income disparities. We have a situation where the top 1% of the most wealthy own, this is not income now, this is accumulated assets. The top 1% has very nearly by now 40% of the entire assets of the United States, whereas the bottom 40% of people have less than 1% of the assets. There's a kind of asymmetry. 140-41. Now, it's not quite so neat. The actual total on the top end is that the top 1% have something just a little bit less than 40%, something like 37 to 38%, but close enough. And on the bottom, it's even worse. The bottom 40% in this country don't even make it to 1% of the assets of the country. They're languishing down at 0.3%. And indeed, this may be lower now because these statistics are a couple of years old. So you have a situation where the top 1% controls almost 40% of the assets, and the bottom 40% control less than 1%, something approaching zero. Something, statistically, it's basically zero. You can say that the bottom 40% in this country have no assets at all. The debt outweighs the assets in their personal net worth. Nevertheless, for the reactionary Republicans and Tea Party fanatics, Austrians, Chicago boys, and assorted charlatans, we've got to push ahead with more tax cuts for the rich. Now, this was always known. What's new now is that the Obama White House, right? The White House characterized by all of that messianic rhetoric and those utopian promises, the Messiah, the Mahdi, the anointed one, the one, has now hitched his wagon to this. And notice the technique is really the same, and it's been noted ironically by a bunch of reactionaries on the radio. Obama's constant refrain is, vote for this suicidal, rotten, regressive, reactionary piece of legislation, or you will be destroying my presidency. Vote for my health bill in the form of the fascist corporate state with a bailout primarily for bankrupt insurance companies and forcing everybody to buy their rotten insurance policies under the sanctions of the Internal Revenue Service. Vote for that Republican monstrosity, because it turns out to have been, of course, a Republican bill. It's a bailout bill for the insurance companies authored by Republicans some years ago, and the notion of the individual mandate coming from Senator Grassley. Obama says, you've got to vote for that monstrosity or you're endangering my presidency. And he's done this on other things. And now we've got another case. He's told them, you've got to vote for this tax cuts for the rich bill or you'll be destroying my presidency. And they've now gone ahead and done so. We'll get the vote totals and look into who voted for it and all the rest of this maybe by next week. But overnight now, the House has rolled over. The protest of the left liberals just as feckless and as useless as one would have thought. Although it is good to hear from somebody like DeFazio and a few others who have reasonable things to say. The stuff about the tax cuts for the rich is not the worst. This is just the beginning. The absolute worst is the tampering with the funding mechanism for Social Security. This is the worst thing. You know, whether if super rich parasites get bonanzas from federal tax policy, well, that's hardly new. That's been going on now for decades. But now, for the first time in a very, very long time, there is now tampering with the mechanism that funds Social Security. Right now, you can say Roosevelt showed, I think, a degree of wisdom in saying we want to have a dedicated funding source for Social Security. So we take it off the budget. We separate Social Security and the old age pension system and the disability pension system. Separate that from the vicissitudes of the General Revenue Fund, right? Get a firewall in there. Obama, true to his pledge to the Washington Post editorial board made a week before the inauguration, having gutted Medicare to the tune of $500 billion, he is now attacking Social Security. And this is a stealth attack. This is an attack that has duped a lot of people. A lot of left liberals have been gulled by this, and it's very easy to sell. And it is the measure contained in this wretched package that cuts the Social Security payroll tax, the 2% FICA tax, FICA. That is cut by 2% over the next year. It is the part of the FICA tax which is paid by the worker, not the boss, but the worker, and it's about $125 billion or thereabouts. That money is now given in the form of a tax cut. It's going to be $20 to $40 a week for most people, $50 a week, and this only impacts the people who have jobs and who therefore pay this. And it'll be interesting to see whether the self-employment tax is also included, because that is really part of the same mechanism. But the idea with this is now you've subtracted $125 billion from the Social Security Trust Fund for the purpose of what? For the purpose, really, of short-term support for Obama's demagogic, bankrupt political position. In other words, Obama's saying, I'm more than willing to loot and weaken Social Security as a price for shoring up my short-term demagogic success. And he calls people up and saying, if you don't consent to tampering with the funding mechanism, then you're destroying my presidency. Now, let's look into this. They claim that the money that is not going to come into Social Security because of what Obama's just done will be drawn from the General Revenue Fund, and they claim it's only for 1 year. What Obama has actually done is to bring closer the moment where a successful reactionary attack on Social Security can be carried out with the Tea Party fanatics in the front lines as cannon fodder. We'll be back in a minute.